let me start. You can sign in afterwards if you want to. So, thank you. Good morning, first of all. Is it good morning, right? Good morning. Thank you for coming out and listening to us today propose the new rates and charges that, if they're approved and adopted by council, will go into effect July 1 of 2024. Right? Next slide, please. I think it's important to start with some background information on how we got here. So as you all know, August 2013 was the adoption of the rate that we currently have of the landing fee. In 2016, in February, MBAA, AOPA, and certain airport users filed a complaint proceeding with the FAA claiming that the 2013 landing fee is unreasonable and it should be reduced. Let's go to January 2017. We all know that the city and the federal government entered into a consent decree. I'm not going to go into details, but I wanted to mention a couple of things. The first part is the city was allowed to shorten its runway, which we did in December 2017, and allowed the city to close its airport on or after January 1, 2029. With that, the city also is obligated to continue to make its airport available for public use under reasonable terms until December 31st, 2028. In July 2022, the FAA issued a final agency decision on the 2013 landing fee. And what it said, of course, we have a different environment, a shorter runway, different fleet mix, therefore your 2013 landing fee is obsolete. A year later, in August of 2023, we received a letter from the Federal Aviation Administration. That letter is in the packet at the back of FAQs. It said, among other things, that the city should reduce its rates and charges and account for its surplus while it's doing those calculations. And that's where we are today. We started those back in September, and we're here with you today to discuss our proposed reductions of 53% across the board over the entire rates and charges of the airport. Next slide, please. What the requirements? Well, why do we do this, right? So there are three major components to it. One is what I just mentioned, the final agency decision requiring us to reduce the rates by accounting for the airport surplus, the aeronautical surplus. The second is the rates and charges policy, which provides, and I'm going to read for verbatim so I don't miss anything, that the progressive accumulation of substantial amounts of surplus of aeronautical revenues may warrant an FAA inquiry into whether aeronautical fees are consistent with the airport's proprietary obligations to make the airport available on fair and reasonable terms. And lastly, the consent decree required the city to comply with the standards of certain grant assurances that are stipulated within the consent decree, continue to make the airport available for aeronautical uses on reasonable and non-unjustly discriminatory terms, use its airport's revenues for airport purposes only, and make the airport as financially self-sustainable as possible by using non-aeronautical revenues at fair market values. So those properties had to be on fair market value. Next slide, please. So the city hired the same consultant we hired back in 2013 that developed the landing fees. Our calculations and the financial model we use today is different than what we did before. The reason it's different is what I mentioned before. It has to account for the surplus. And that surplus, the aeronautical surplus, in our calculation, in our methodology, exhausted by December 31st, 2028. So there were three major components of this methodology. The first is to take and split all revenues, expenditures, capital cost, and surplus into two cost centers, aeronautical and non-aeronautical. And I'll go a little bit more into detail which one each one means in the future slides. The second is to take the same items, the same revenue components and expenditures, and project it through December 31st, 2028. And lastly, is create a financial model that reduces the rates and charges from July 1, 2024, which is what we propose to begin the adoption of these rates, to December 31st to bring the aeronautical surplus to zero. Next slide, please. So let me break the projections even further. Let's start with airport revenues first. For fiscal year 23-24, which is the year that we are today, fiscal years for the city start July 1 and end June 30th. So the fiscal year 23-24 ends June 30th, 2024, this year. We took a line-by-line itemized list of the entire budget on our revenues and put it into the two cost centers. So what is aeronautical revenues? Aeronautical revenues are derived by landing fees, fuel flowage fees, tie-down fees, and leases, including hangars used for aeronautical purposes. For non-aeronautical revenues, which is the majority of the revenues of the airport, are derived from building leases, commercial leases, restaurant leases, art studios, and hangars that are used for non-aeronautical purposes. In fiscal year 23-24, the airport revenues were $18.7 million. That's what we projected to be in our budget of 23-24, 18.7. 5.8 of which is aeronautical. And we have to create certain assumptions to project these revenues between now and December 31st, 2028. So there were two assumptions made. Fuel flowage fees and landing fees stay flat. There were not going to be any adjustments upwards of those revenues. On the rest of the revenues, we took into consideration a 3% increase annually that begins in fiscal year 25-26. So July 25, 2025 is when the adjustment happens. Next slide, please. Then we're going into the operating expenses. Same philosophy, line by line item. Put it on two cost centers, aeronautical and non-aeronautical. Our operating expenses are projected in this, we budgeted for this year to be 11.1 million, 4.2 of which are aeronautical. And the assumptions we made is that our expenses will increase by 3%, again, same time, fiscal year 25-26. And these expenses are considered to project future airport surplus. Next slide, please. Capital costs. We project that the capital improvement program of the airport is approximately $60 million. Most of which, 51 million is for non-aeronautical buildings. Mostly it's buildings and parking lots. The remaining 8.7 million are for aeronautical. As part of our assumptions or our projections, we did not plan any projects for aeronautical purposes beyond June 30th, 2026. The projects are divided into three distinct categories. The first one is approximately $4 million. It goes into the runways and taxiways. $3 million is put in reserves for environmental site assessment associated by the Douglas aircraft manufacturing. And $1.4 million for refurbishments to certain aeronautical facilities. The cost of aeronautical projects will account for the aeronautical surplus, where the non-aeronautical will not. Last slide, please. I think it's the last slide. No, I have one more. All right, so how do we project the surplus? Our consultant, which, by the way, the person that done all these calculations with us remotely to answer any questions if you guys have any today, look at the historical sources, including the disallowed loans that the FAA found from the general fund to the airport fund, and they will return to the airport fund about $7.4 million. and any other historical to account for the surplus. As of this fiscal year, the surplus for the airport is $31 million. From that, 18 million is non-aeronautical and 13 million is aeronautical. I want to put a distinction in this. From the aeronautical surplus, none of them was attributed to landing fees or fuel flowage fees. Most of the surplus, or all of the surplus, came out of rental rates and land leases and hangar leases, everything from leases. That's what the attributed factors were. So when we put that into this methodology I described earlier and into the model, we identified a 53% reduction beginning July 1 of reduction of all the rates and charges for aeronautical purposes, including rental rates, projected outwards to December 31. So 53% will be the initial reduction, beginning July 1, if it's adopted by Council. Next steps, next slide, please. So next steps are simple. I mean, we had 2 meetings with aviation groups. We're meeting here today to answer any of your questions. Tomorrow, we're going to the Airport Commission at 7 o'clock at the Santa Monica Institute, it's called, and it's located at, if anybody wants the address and stuff, we'll be happy to provide it today. The presentation that I'm doing today will be tomorrow, the exact same one. May 28th, we're going to the city's budget study session. It's at City Hall, City Council chambers at 6:30. And then for adoption in June 25th, which is the city's adoption, again, at City Council chambers. And then again, as I mentioned earlier, implementing these new rates and charges by that date. That concludes my presentation, and we're ready to answer any questions. Along with myself, I also have Scott Lewis, which is our outside counsel, and Zach, that works for WJ Advisories, that you can see him in the corner there, or not, that is able to answer any questions you have on the methodology. So anybody that wants to speak or ask questions, you can come here, ask the questions, and then we'll be able to respond. Okay? Mark, you want to go first?
Mark at the man. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you, Celios, Diana, Ivan, for holding this event. It's rare that we get the opportunity to meet in person. Usually it's just a bunch of emails flying back and forth. The question I have is very simple. Why is the city continuing, and I don't know who it is in the city because I talk to city council members and they're not aware of this math, but why are we reinventing the wheel and continually doing math in an inappropriate manner? In the August 4th letter, the FAA clearly states that non-aeronautical and aeronautical are in the same kitty. You cannot separate it. When you make the airport unpleasant and an aviator leaves with his airplane and that hangar becomes non-aeronautical, that is in the same kitty as far as the FAA is concerned. So the 31 million, the 40 million, whatever is in the budget, or excuse me, in the bank account for the airport, that belongs to aeronautical. Also, the August 4th letter clearly stated that rates should be reduced immediately 70%. Immediately is unambiguous. It's very clear. August 4th, why did it not happen August 4th? In 9 months, you can cook up a baby. I mean, this is ridiculous. Why? What is the justification for the city to wait until this time? We lost Bill's Air. If you had reduced the rent 70% for Bill's Air would still be here. We would have a mechanic on the field to service airplanes. Instead, those airplanes are burning fuel to fly to another airport. This is just, it's misguided management, and it's not following a letter that you put it in the packet that I'm reading. In fact, one of your slides said the requirement included non-aviation. So your methodology is contradicting your presentation. And we don't understand why that is happening. This math is not complex. The Part 16 that brought us here the math was done by a 100-pound accountant who didn't even have her CPA license yet. We redid the math in 2 hours and found that you'd made an error that you discovered, and therefore reduced the rates from 70% to 53%. So my bottom line question is, why are we ignoring the letter and the directions of the letter? Why are we not reducing to 70%? And why are we spending the surplus willy-nilly around the airport on projects that nobody can accomplish effectively without a master plan in 4 years? So those are 3 basic questions, and I'd like an answer.
Hello, Mark. It's nice to see you in person. Scott Lewis. I am outside counsel for the city. As Mark knows, the city and the FAA have a disagreement about whether the FAA can require the city to use non-aeronautical revenue to subsidize aeronautical rates at this airport. What the FAA indicated, and it's consistent with the rates and charges policy, is that if there is aeronautical surplus, the FAA can take that into account in reviewing whether rates are reasonable. And the rate package that you have and the rate methodology that the city uses has eliminated all of the aeronautical surplus. That's as far as that policy could possibly take us. There is no requirement as a matter of federal law to use non-aeronautical revenue in addition to aeronautical surplus to provide subsidies to the aeronautical users at the airport, and the city has decided not to do that. Do you want to talk about the capital program? Mark, you know, Mark, that that we and your council have a difference of opinion about this, and that's not a surprising thing, and it happens that way. But to say it's a false statement is not right.
It's stated in the letter that you stand it up.
We have a disagreement about what that letter can say and what it does say, and about the validity of what the FAA in fact calculated and what the FAA can order the city to do. The city has responded to the FAA's request with respect to the elimination of non-aeronautical surplus, of aeronautical surplus. Aeronautical surplus.
Okay. Just housekeeping. If you're gonna speak, can you come to the mic, because we're recording this meeting. We want all the conversation and comments to be recorded. Relating to the Capitol, Mark, if you may, I'll be happy to answer. Currently, right now, you can see there's a lot of construction on this side. We don't need a master plan to know that our buildings are going to fall apart and they're not going to last until 28. So we need to invest in those buildings to bring new tenants to it, except if the suggestion you're making is leave the buildings fall apart because there's no master plan. Those buildings needed to be done, and there are additional buildings that need to be done. So that investment needs to happen.
That wasn't the question.
The question, that was the question.
No, it wasn't.
What is the question?
The question was why, when the FAA said in
Wait.
August,
No,
Can you speak?
Can you come here?
I'm aware. On August 4th, the FAA directed to you, Mr. Lewis, a statement that says airport revenue, both aeronautical and non-aeronautical, must be used for the operation and maintenance of an airport. It is not established as a collection for the eventual closure and transfer of funds off the airport. So the direct question is, why are you, in contravenance to the FAA dictates, segregating out aeronautical and non-aeronautical use when the FAA, who has the authority over this, has told you can't do that? This question is to Mr. Lewis.
I know, but hold on. Eve, you interrupted me when I was trying to explain the Capitol is part of the question, what Mark said, and you told me that was not the question. That was one of the questions. So I answered that question to Mark. Now Scott can respond to you on yours. Thank you.
So it's important to distinguish between two aspects. I mean, we're going to get into some technical legal things here, but it's
I
important.
have no problem with that.
Okay, it's important to distinguish between the provision of the rates and charges policy that says that the FAA can take a progressive accumulation of substantial amounts of aeronautical surplus into account in assessing the reasonableness of rates and charges. There's no dispute about that.
Correct.
And in this situation, what the city has done is to produce a calculation of rates and charges that takes the aeronautical surplus down to zero. So that requirement, there's no argument that provision of the rates and charges policy itself required the city to reduce the rates any more than it's proposing to reduce them. The other provision of the rates and charges policy doesn't speak to rates at all. It speaks to the lawful use of airport revenue. And the city does not dispute that so long as the consent decree is in place, the non-aeronautical revenue here can only be used for airport purposes. There's no dispute about that. There is a dispute about whether the city has to use the non-aeronautical revenue to reduce aeronautical rates and charges, and we don't believe that the law requires that. We don't believe that the FAA policy requires that. We don't believe that the FAA letter suggests that we have to do that, and the city has elected not to do that.
Perhaps I went to a different type of law school, but words have meanings, and the FAA letter is clear. It is not ambiguous, and I appreciate you rolling your eyes and raising your eyebrows. I am trying to have a collegial conversation.
So am I.
Do you need a moment?
No.
Okay. The FAA presume, let's just assume, so we don't need to have this banter. Let's assume that the FAA actually said you cannot segregate out non-aeronautical surplus from aeronautical, or you can segregate them out, but you can't use the non-aeronautical surplus for non-aeronautical uses. It must be used for aeronautical uses. Would you agree that what the city is proposing does not comply with that approach?
That's not what the FAA said.
Presume it does.
Well, that's not a hypothetical that
So
makes
I
any
will.
sense.
So we can all assume that you're declining to answer that is actually an affirmance, that this is a correct statement. That
No.
that if the you say, listen, you yourself said the city and the FAA have a dispute or a disagreement about whether you can do it the way that the city says you can do it. I'm saying, forget the dispute. Let's assume that the FAA is right. Would you agree that your proposal is not in compliance with what the FAA says you need to do?
If the FAA were right and there were a legal requirement to use non-aeronautical surplus to reduce aeronautical rates, you'd be right. But that's not what the law is.
Okay. So moving past that, I have a couple other comments. There's an accounting principle that's called garbage in is garbage out. I don't think there's any dispute about that. And so, Stelios, I'm going to direct this to you. At last Airport Commission meeting, there was a COP, Commercial Operating Permit, application for our aviation provider who washes our aircraft. So the new provider, the aircraft service, and I forget their names, it was Clearwater, I forget who the new COP is, but the aircraft washing service applied for a COP. And you, Stelios, when asked, why are they designated as non-aeronautical, you defended it and said, well, they're not aeronautical because they also wash cars.
No.
So
Let me
I
answer
can play
that.
the recording.
I can answer that. That's fine if I said that. But ASPs are specifically designed, provided by FAA. Is not airport service provider because it washes aircraft. Is not an aeronautical service provider. Scott, am I correct? That's why we look at it as a non-aeronautical part. It's always been the case. So our minimum standards define aeronautical service providers on this airport, correct? Washing of aircraft is not part of it.
Okay, so then under your theory, the service that washes our aircraft on the field, that goes in the non-aeronautical kitty pot. Is that how the accounting will play out? If they are tagged as non-aeronautical, then the service that we can all agree won't be here if we don't have airplanes to wash. The city's position, mind you, pretty impressively with a straight face, is that that is not an aeronautical service. Have I got that right?
I think so, yes. I have to look at where that specific lease fell into, but I can go in and find out if that's the case or not.
Okay.
What's the rent? $200 a month? Or $250 a month?
I think the
Okay.
dollar amount is irrelevant. We're talking about the process.
That's not their question.
Yeah. So, but sailors, I want to thank you for actually answering that question. I appreciate it, even though it's an uncomfortable question to answer. I appreciate you actually answering it.
I'm not uncomfortable. I'm fine. Thank you.
So, one last kind of broader scope commentary is, while I appreciate you answering the question, what is extremely disappointing is the tried and true approach that is being employed here is this policy or revised proposed rates clearly and with some lack of transparency seeks to pit the residents against the pilots. You are throwing fuel on the flame, and let me explain why. We all know the residents already have an opinion, misguided or not. It's their opinion, and they are entitled to it. That us pilots are we're self-entitled. We're all rich. This is our playground. And now I get what's being done. Hats off to the strategy. Let the pilots and the residents fuel it out while we, the city, kind of continue on with this $40 million slush fund that we're going to put away and use to do something else if and when the airport closes. So don't pay attention to us over here with the checkbook. You want the pilots and the residents to argue. And they will. And you're going to get these arguments today, and tomorrow you'll get the flip side of that from the residents who, interestingly, maintain 100% control of the airport commission. So I want to acknowledge that that's what's done. Remind the pilots that this is not a pilot versus resident, that actually we and the residents are united on this because we both believe that the city has failed us. You have failed to provide transparency on this funny accounting. You have failed to serve us citizens and taxpayers by following the advice of the FAA. So, while we are all very good about talking about our problems and not about our solutions, I'd like to make a few. So, Stelios, I am disappointed that you didn't ask the pilots. Listen, like it or not, we have surplus that needs to be spent down. What are your thoughts? I have asked you for years. I'd like a bathroom. I don't think that's asking too much, other than the one porta potty that is on the north side of the field near my aircraft. I'd like a bathroom. I somehow don't think that that is an overreach, given that you've got $40 million that somehow needs to be spent between now and 2028. Additionally, and probably more importantly than my personal comfort, is our community. Why is there no proposal? Let's have a community hangar where we can entertain the children. Let's put some money and give scholarships to our children so we can teach STEM classes at the airport. Where is the proposal to use some of this greedy money, is what I'll call it, because it is insanely large? Where is that money? Where is the proposal to invest it in our children and in our community? Why not have women, are 7% of the pilot population, less than 10% of all aeronautical businesses? Why not have a grant for minority and women aeronautical businesses on the field? There is so much good we can do with this money. And the bad decision is inviting lawsuits. I'm a lawyer, make a living off of it. This is not how we should be generating attorney's fees, by inviting what you know is not only going to be a Part 16, but also an invalidation of the consent decree for the city's failure to comply with Grant Assurance 25. Why are we doing that? Have we not learned anything from the last 40 years of litigation? We can all get along. Stelios, even you and me, we can get along. We have a common purpose. We pilots, we want to be good citizens, but you make it so damn hard. We want to be good citizens, good residents, good members of the community, and I hope you echo that too.
I have a question. So I read through, hi everyone. I read through the proposal as well as the Airport Commission notes last night, and I've been on the field off and on since 2008, consistently since probably 2011. There was a time when it was decided that having the landing fees was useful. In 2018, when the use of the land changed because the runway was shortened, my question is, instead of trying to drain the fund between now and then, why are there no reimbursements to the people who actually overexpended between the shortening of the runway in 2018 until now? Why is that not at all considered in the current proposal?
I think I can try to answer it this way. Number one, the landing fee, although the landing fee is proposed to be reduced now, the landing fee that's in place has been, for all of that period of time, lower than it would have been if it actually was calculated to recover all the costs of the airfield. So it was less than a full cost recovery landing fee throughout that period of time. And I would also say that that there is no legal obligation to give refunds. We know of no precedent for that. And what the city's proposing to do is to return all of the aeronautical surplus that it has to the aeronautical users of the airport over the course of the next 5.5 years. So all that money's coming back to the aeronautical community, and it didn't come from the payment of landing fees. It came entirely from the payment of hangar rentals.
Okay, so for example, some of the hangars have been forced to change use because they've been called now non-aeronautical when they originally were aeronautical use of the land. Do you plan on reimbursing those lease agreements with the difference of their rate rent between a non-aeronautical use of a hangar and a aeronautical use of the hangar?
You want to take that, Ivan? Yeah, Ivan will answer it.
So, yes. Okay. Ivan Campbell, I'm the Deputy City Attorney. I've been working on the airport since 2008. Very familiar with the airport and all the federal and local laws that apply to it. To my right is Scott Lewis. He's the city's outside counsel and has been our outside counsel for about 10 years. Stelios Makritis, our airport director. Regarding your question, so as Scott just mentioned, there's no legal obligation to issue refunds. Even if the city wanted to issue refunds, in the scenario that you raised, it would be problematic in the sense that the same tenants aren't there.
If they're not there, wouldn't it be because they were forced out by an increase in their rent rate from aeronautical to non-aeronautical use?
By circumstance.
It's what,
like
3 times
evaluation.
more.
And then even if the city wanted to do that, it's sort of like opening a Pandora's box of or a slippery slope of where would it end. I do think, though, however, that the effort here is to make sure that at the time of the expiration of the consent decree, that the aeronautical surplus balance is zero. And I believe that is what the FAA was primarily concerned about, because a credible argument can be made that that aeronautical surplus, the revenue derived from airport users that went into that surplus, was paid by users and should be returned to users. And if, and I'm using the word if, because this is something that's outside of my control and outside of the control of everybody here. If the city council decides to go forward with closing the airport, we do not want a situation where aeronautical users are saying like, hey, we paid this money, there's no facility here, we want a refund, and so forth. So,
Well, isn't that then exactly? So we've already lost tenants, for example, because they were starved out. So they're not getting any reimbursement on the overcharges they were given from the time of 2018 with the shortening of the runway till now. That's not being considered in the current plan.
I hear you, and that's essentially asking for retroactive relief, and that's a very hard thing for us to do.
I mean,
From
hard
an
was
account-
doing it
from an
right from the
accounting
beginning.
basis.
If it was done right in the beginning, we wouldn't be in this meeting and having this conversation.
No, listen, I hear you because what you're saying from an equity standpoint makes sense in the sense that that may have been the case for certain tenants that had a aeronautical use of their property that's converted, like now they wanted to put a non-aeronautical uses.
Yeah.
But
And that was the city's decision to replace those buildings from aeronautical to non-aeronautical use. That wasn't the decision.
I'll have to defer to
That's
Stelios
city
on
council's
use.
decision on who gets approved for any building.
Correct.
Who would help me out?
But-
Which buildings are we referring to? So I
Right.
can-
My mic? Or
it is on. It's on, right?
anything on the airport land should be in one pot, is to my understanding of everything I've ever read. There is one airport, and yes, there are now areas that are under consideration to be non-aeronautical areas or aeronautical areas. But everything that is revenue generating needs to be into one place,
It is.
which is the airport
It
revenue.
is. It's
It
called
is.
the airport fund, which
So-
is an
Which was off.
It's an enterprise fund.
Which was off by several $1 million, as discovered, which is, again, why we're in this meeting.
No, listen, and
That's not true.
you know, I don't know if I'm going to ever be able to.
I'm asking questions because I
satisfactorily
really want to
answer your
know.
question. Well,
And I'm here. This is my livelihood. And it's
hear you.
being treated, I have a business on this field. There are other people who have hangars and have tie downs and have tenants. There's a lot of different things happening that are affected by those decisions. If my lease was, $6 versus $2, that's a major impact per square foot.
correct. So, at the beginning of the presentation, there was a timeline that right now, this effort to reduce the rates and charges, you saw where it came from.
Yeah.
The FAA initially, in an interim decision back in 2019, said, look, this challenge to your landing fee, your rates and charges structure, we think you need to take a look at that. And we made representations to them that we would. Then 2022 comes out, there's a final agency decision, and again, the FAA actually removed from their order any compulsion or order for the city to adjust this landing fee because for technical reasons, they believe that it's obsolete given the changing layout of the airport, specifically the shortened runway. So they couldn't order us to do it. Instead, what they have done in 2022 and in 2023 recently is they have essentially threatened us. They said, city, we believe based on what you've told us so far, you've accumulated too much surplus. And they sent this letter to us, which
Okay.
we included in the packet. And I just wanted to clarify something in the letter because it talks about two separate obligations. The passage that Ms. Lopez was up here and she read, and I'll read it again, airport revenue, and in parentheses, both aeronautical and non-aeronautical, must be used for the operation and maintenance of an airport. And you know what? That's exactly what we're doing. Hold on a second. The city is using airport revenue, both aeronautical and non-aeronautical, for the maintenance and operation of the airport. That's not going to change by what's been presented here, and that's what we've been doing. That's going to continue. All revenue, aeronautical or non-aeronautical, generated at the airport, we are required to have it stay on the property and be returned to the airport. This exercise is the establishment of rates and charges, which is separate, where you have there's the question that Scott was alluding to. The question is is there an obligation for an airport operator to take into account non-aeronautical surplus to offset rates and charges? That's a very different. The sentence that I read in the letter.
I think we're
didn't-
going off base of what I'm asking.
What
Everything
I'm
on the
trying to say-
airport
what I'm
is
trying
airport.
to say is the impression perhaps was given by Mr. Smith and Ms. Lopez that the city wasn't following the FAA's dictates or guidelines or our obligations or the consent decree. And I want to say that that's incorrect. We're talking about something completely different.
So on that note, the
Okay.
FAA has issued an obligation that this airport needs to remain in aviation interest until December 31st, 2028.
That's correct.
This is not an aviation interest to starve the airport fund between now and then.
Well,
We're not
that's
starving- hold on.
nobody's starving the airport.
Nobody's
fund.
starving there.
And-
Tell me another airport that is investing $4 million on runway projects.
Right.
A smaller.
Tell me another airport that's closing their airport, Stelios. Nobody's doing that but this
That's
airport.
correct, and that's
Not
a
what I'm
that's
saying.
a, that's a
We're talking about
decision that
operating-
And
nobody,
nobody
here
here
has made.
can make that decision, but these decisions are acting as such as if that decision has already been made, which it has not.
Okay, so
So,
there's $13 million in aeronautical surplus that's going to be reduced to zero. There's $18 million in non-aeronautical surplus that's not going to have an
It could
effect
be
on
on
the
airport
reduction of rates
improvement.
and charges.
it could be on airport.
I don't understand if it is only one fund,
Can I answer that?
and it is airport fund.
They're correct.
The fund comes over here.
They're separated for the purposes of setting rates and charges, sir.
By
That's
use.
it.
At the
It's-
end of the day, it is a surplus.
Wanna answer that?
Doesn't matter where it comes from, it's a surplus in the fund that needs to be, from what we
Okay.
understand, that needs to be spent.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I'm not as
No.
smart as I look. Explain to me, so I can
So,
understand.
sir, I guess the easiest way to put it is that the law says that we have to account for the aeronautical surplus. That's what the law says. The city doesn't dispute that. FAA doesn't dispute that. The aeronautical surplus, according to our calculations, is $13 million. Okay, where the law is silent is the $18 million. Because that is true, Mark. The law is silent there. All right, and because if it all right, okay.
We're not going
I understand that, but even if it is silent,
Okay.
my question is, at the end of the day, the FAA requires you not to have any surplus from airport operation, okay? And it needs to be put back to the airport fund and spent in the airport fund, whether it is in fixing the airport, improving the runway until whenever it is open, or reducing the rate, correct?
No, that's
No, it really isn't correct, and we could spend a lot of time on this, and maybe we will.
You want to understand it, maybe I don't understand.
So I think one way that may be helpful here to understand the difference between aeronautical and non-aeronautical is that at bottom the regulatory rules are very different. For example, for the establishment of rates and charges, the city cannot charge more than the actual costs of providing, like the runway. The landing fee could not be more than the actual cost of the runway. In what we're proposing to do here, of course, is to provide a landing fee that's much lower than the actual cost of the runway. But the rules governing non-aeronautical operations at the airport are very, very different. The rules require the city to charge fair market value for non-aeronautical uses of the airport. That's an equally strong federal requirement. And so from the very beginning, the whole federal regulatory regime recognizes really three things. One is aeronautical rates and charges should not exceed cost recovery. Non-aeronautical rates and charges must satisfy the fair market value standard. And the entire sum of all that money can only be used for airport purposes. There's nothing in the FAA that says the entire sum of that money must in all circumstances be used to reduce aeronautical rates below cost.
47.07.
Can I-
The U.S. Code says exactly the opposite of what you are saying.
And it's true for every
It's
other
clear.
country.
Can I?
Only Santa Monica has this point of view.
understand there's a difference between setting rates and charges and operating and maintaining an airport. We're talking about two different things.
Surplus, Ivan, was created because of the revenues. So you can't
Correct.
say we can only spend revenue on airport. Oh, but the surpluses that were generated because of the excess revenue, oh no, we can treat that differently. That is absurd.
That's exactly what I was getting.
Exactly.
How do you separate one part
Cannot.
and then you cannot separate the other? It's going to be litigation again. Why?
Okay, so I'm sorry, guys. I love you all very much. I have one more question.
So whoever has questions, can you come up here? She's been trying, so can you rephrase the question you had to begin?
So I run a pilot shop. So I help people fly for a living. I see that we have a shortage of pilots. I see that we have educational needs. We have children who could have amazing careers in this industry. The airport is doing beautiful things across the board. Why is not any of that excess revenue being put towards the future of our future generations of children and people who need these services? To say that we're just going to use it, we're going to drain that fund, I don't agree with the methodology in the first place. I think based on everything I know, there should be a refund to people who spent that money since 2018 when the runway was shortened. But also, what you're going to do with the money could benefit the future. This airport has been here since 1917. It has been beneficial to the community for the entire length of that time. It can continue to do so, and it should continue to do so until minimum 2028, if not in perpetuity as intended. But we don't know the answer beyond 2028. However, taking a methodology that does not account for the possibility that it will stay open is not a responsible way of doing the accounting methodology. And that's, I guess, all I have to say.
Hi, everybody. My name's Christian Fry. I'm a 26-year resident of the city of Santa Monica, and I've been a tenant at the airport for over 20 years. My question is kind of a follow-up to what Vanessa just asked about. We've seen at Airport Commission over the last couple of months some real adverse reactions to attempts at the airport to do community outreach to make the airport more accessible to our fellow residents. And I'm curious, is there an ability for some of this surplus fund to be used for community outreach?
Specifically?
The event that we want to have in September celebrating the 100th anniversary of the World Cruiser, Douglas World Cruiser, for example. There's a pretty big fee involved just in that was paid for by the city last year that now has been said, well, we can't pay for the event fee, $450 or something. I mean, these are the kind of things we hope that there's a way to allow the community to really benefit. I mean, we're here in this incredible museum. These are facilities that should be improved and have opportunities way beyond whatever the ultimate future of the airport itself is. I'm just concerned that we can spend all this money on aeronautical, non-aeronautical, get into all of that, but I want to make sure the community gets to come out and experience what this airport is for as long as it exists.
I'll try to answer your question a little bit. So, and I much appreciated what was said by the previous speaker about the desirability of expanding access to aeronautic profession. The federal rules we're talking about here, the statute that Ms. Lopez quoted, actually has limitations on the ability of the city to use its airport funds for community purposes.
That's why I'm asking.
It's called airport revenue diversion, and the FAA takes a very crabbed view of that. They would say, for an example, that they give of an allowable community use is a $250 contribution or $50 expenditure. So every time an airport that has federal obligations is asked to support community efforts, it has to meet very stringent requirements that the FAA enforces with respect to the use of airport revenue for a non-airport purpose. The FAA does acknowledge that there are some legitimate community uses of airport revenue. They have to be carefully considered on a case-by-case basis. And it's
So there is a potential path to, if we made a proposal, I mean,
Absolutely.
is that how that, I'm curious about how that would go. We'd
And
make
it
a
has to
proposal.
do, I mean, your question's actually a really good question, because part of what FAA's standard is whether or not the expenditure of funds for an off-airport event will have
on
benefit-
airport event.
or on airport, for a community-based event, whether that expenditure of airport funds serves the airport purpose by building a better relationship with the community, which is exactly what
That's
you want to
exactly
do.
what we're talking about, yep.
So-
Or a community hangar, which has been discussed
All right,
today.
and some of those kinds of proposals have been allowed by the FAA. Some of them are not allowed. They all require case-by-case review, but I'm sure the people here at the airport would be open to proposals. Nobody's opposed to improving relationships with your community.
Well, that's not exactly true. When you listen to the airport commission, they don't want to have a single event at the airport here, and anything that's
I don't
positive
speak for
about
them.
it.
I don't speak for
I mean,
them.
Ivan was in the room. I mean, I'm personally really, I struggle a lot with that, because regardless of your opinion about this airport as an airport, the ability for it to reach our young people, to provide opportunities to skills development and future and career path, we have an incredible asset as a community. And to say that we should not have events here for the next 5 years is bonkers to me.
So let me try to answer it different. Scott mentioned the regulatory requirements. Let me speak about city policies, right? And I'm happy to send you the email depicting the administrative instructions of what events are and what city can and cannot do. The commission has not made a recommendation to council. They voiced their wishes that city's resources are not given to this specific event. We're talking about the Douglas event in September. They were specific about that.
Which is really disappointing.
I understand your frustration, I understand your disappointment, but that is not a city policy. There was not, council did not direct staff or the city manager.
So that was a
not to do so.
recommendation from council to?
No.
Or I mean, from airport commission
No.
to council?
They did not make a recommendation.
Oh, they did not?
The last meeting, I asked if their wishes are such, as a group, that they can make a recommendation to city council to voice them. Secondly, what we can and cannot do as a division of the city relating to giving free to be co-sponsors or all the other layers of an event comes with certain requirements. And as I said, I'll be happy to send you the AI that we distributed to the airport commission. I think we distributed someplace. I'll resend it to you. Me as an airport director, or Rick as my boss, that's standing there, cannot make that decision. That comes from the top.
I understand, but I think
So
the question of we have this giant surplus, this is tens of millions of dollars. If there is a path, I just am really concerned that the city takes this stance, that the airport is persona non grata. We can't have events. We don't want anybody coming here to have learn
did
something,
not
to have
say
a good time. I want to make sure that if there is a path, we understand what the path is. If it's applications, let's get those applications in. The city just cannot say no to events at this facility. I mean, I'm not saying they can't, but
Right.
So isn't there already a precedent set? Because we were able to do that partnership last year for the 99th anniversary. We had 2,000 people in attendance. It was fully a community event.
That's correct.
It was 100% in benefit to the community that the airport hosted and threw for the entire community.
We didn't host the event. We did
Well, it
not
was here
host
at the field.
You guys did. That is correct.
I did.
So
Right.
I understand what you're saying. I understand what you're asking. It's a valid concern. There's two questions. One, can we use airport revenues for this type of event? And I believe Scott answered that.
Yeah, and if there's an application
you have
process for
an
the FAA, let's do it. Let's apply.
There's another one, right? So the next application is if you guys want this event to waive all the fees and become a city sponsor, that doesn't, you can send it to me and I'll forward upwards.
Understood. I think my
But
bigger
as of
question is,
today, I didn't receive any
It's
of those.
commemorating 100 years of city history. It is very specifically related to the reason all of this city is actually here. It was the Douglas Aircraft Plant that actually built this community.
I know.
I think my
I know
question
you know,
really
but
is,
let me remind you once again that this is a city
As I asked,
100-year Douglas Cruiser event.
right,
It's
I've
worldwide.
asked, send me the proposal of what you're asking us as a city to do and we can respond.
okay.
That's
I
what
think
I've
my
asked. That's all
last
I-
bit is really understanding, with this surplus, Community hangars are a thing that's been brought up a bunch of times. I just want to understand if all this money is being spent on buildings and the retrofit of buildings, which is also interesting because this proposal to turn the airport into a park, they always talk about 227 acres, which would in theory be leveling every building on the airport, which is clearly not the city's intention. So there's a bit of confusion between what's being said to the community about what would happen potentially as the great park. That I won't even get into the details about that.
Can I make a statement before you
Yeah,
continue,
of course.
please? So the city is undertaking through a different division within Public Works, undertaking the future of this land. What is the future holds? That has a kickoff
On Sunday.
Yes, there
At
you
Clover Park.
that is a process that what's going to happen beyond this. What is this, what is here, what I'm here for, is to operate the airport within the requirements with the federal government.
I understand.
So the 227 conversation you just mentioned, that is, if you go to that event that day, you can make that statement. But I'm pretty sure we all know that I don't believe the plan is to demolish every single building on this.
No, I don't think that it is. But I guess my question is, if we are really thinking beyond whatever the future of this land ultimately is, and I think we can all agree it'll be some mixed use of things, as it is currently, beautifully. Airport, parks, arts, businesses, all sorts of wonderful things. I mean, I think Santa Monica is one of the most unique airports in the world in this way. And in my opinion, should continue in that same vein, and that will be what our group will be telling people at the meeting on Sunday. I think there's a future that includes all of these things. But the question in my mind is, we have tens of millions of dollars. Could a community hangar be funded, and what is the path that we go to do that? So we can send you an email with I just want to make sure that the request proposal comes in the right form.
Please.
Because
And you send me the
some of that money,
proposal.
in my opinion, should be used for something like that.
I would like the proposal to include several things, including security of the airfield while you're doing it. What is it going to be used and all that? If I received one in the past, I apologize, I can't remember the details. I remember the last conversation was about 4 years ago, 5 years ago, about this.
So event proposal
Oscar,
we make to you directly, which you then pass on
the proposal
to the
for
city.
the hangar, the community hangar?
Well, no, two things. The community hangar 1 and events 2 both go to you, then ultimately to the
The
to
events
the county
can come
to the
through
city
me and I
council.
can funnel it upwards. I think that's going to be a lot easier. But the community hangar is on me. When it
I
comes to
understand.
look at it.
And, Mr. Fry, I'd like to, because I thought I heard earlier in your statement a potential suggestion that, I want to avoid any type of inference that the positions taken by the Airport Commission are the city's positions.
Understood.
And I'd like to say that that's not the case.
Okay.
The Airport Commission is what's referred to in city talk as a purely advisory body. They are there to make recommendations to the council. The council is free to accept them, ignore them, or to use them in directing staff to do whatever the council wants staff to do through the manager.
Right.
So, I just want to dispel any sort of...
No. And Ivan, I appreciate that.
Yeah,
And I will
if that
go on
was
record
the-
and say that it has been to the great chagrin of everyone in this room,
Right.
that there is not a single aviator or user of this airport on that group.
Right.
So the advice that comes from the
Right.
Airport Commission is decidedly anti-airport. And
Right.
my feeling about wanting to be able to celebrate the over 100
Right.
years of this airport's contributions and amazing things to this city should be part of what we are.
Right,
I mean,
and
to say there shouldn't be events here for children and the
No,
community
no.
is
And so
bonkers.
Stelios has hinted a reference to internal city processes regarding events.
Yep,
and there
understood.
Three basic types of events. There are private party events, city co-sponsored events, and essentially city-hosted events. And each of those different types of events
Have their own.
little
Understood, yeah.
rules and so forth. So we would be looking at potentially a city co-sponsored event which has its own rules and Stelios is going to share that information with you. And what you did last year, or Vanessa, I believe.
Yeah, Vanessa did that, yeah.
Which was a private event. You're using her leased premises, which you're entirely allowed to do as long as you follow the guidelines
rules.
within,
Yeah.
within
Okay.
your lease and so forth.
Thank you, Ivan, very
Sure.
much.
Actually, Rick Valti, I don't know if you all know it. Rick Valti is the Public Works Director. He's my direct boss.
Hi, Rick.
He made a great recommendation. I mean, you can reach directly to City Council relating to the Douglas event and ask them if they can bring it to a 16 item, right, which is the items at the end where it's council items.
Okay.
If somebody wants to introduce to sponsor the Douglas event day.
That's a fantastic
And then it
idea.
comes with the blessing of the council directing the city manager for staff to sponsor.
Perfect.
And that would be our direction.
So I don't have to
That would
go
be the
through me
direction.
and
Okay.
everybody else. I mean, that's a great idea.
I think it's just thank you for that. It's really valuable for us to understand the pathways to using some of these resources in ways that can benefit the community. And it's just a really important part of what we're all about, you know.
Sure.
So-
And you know, we also don't want to give you, you know, any type of false, not necessarily hope, but saying that the construction of a new hangar, so a new construction capital cost, that's not something that's decided easily.
No, look,
So-
believe me, I have no,
Okay.
I have no sense that would be something that could
That's
rubber
above
stamp
his head
it.
and,
No.
you know.
But I think
Rick-
part of the long-term vision, whatever this process becomes, we have to think about the community's, you know, kind of understanding of what the airport is, was, and can be, you know, so
Correct.
that's it. Thank you very much. I
Thank you.
appreciate it.
For the record, can you introduce yourself first? Before
Sure.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Dave Hopkins, 25-year Santa Monica resident, pilot and user of Santa Monica Airport. Two questions for our gentlemen on the panel here. Number one is the Airport Reserve Fund. I see that that's $31 million and in this current financial year. Did the consultant or did the staff do any studies on either nationwide comparable airports or comparable airports in California? I know of no other airport in the Los Angeles County region that has such a huge surplus measured in tens of millions of dollars. Usually it's in the low single million figures for an airport with 3,500 foot of single runway and the airport movements we had. So was there any independent analysis of what should be the right number?
We did not do an analysis comparables to other airports, but I have to say we have a saying in the industry that is, you see one airport, you see one airport. Every airport is unique. Santa Monica Airport, what drives, and as I described before, what drives the surplus and the revenues to those levels is the real estate portfolio and the price per square foot, especially when it comes to non-aeronautical leases. I don't believe any other airport can have the type of rates we do. That is general aviation in our area. Maybe some up in San Francisco. But I don't know if we are comparable to anybody else in that level. But our real estate portfolio is a significant portfolio and the price per square foot is high.
Thank you.
To
I'd also echo previous speakers by saying the Airport Reserve Fund should be one pot of money, shouldn't be split up in an artificial way. Our regulator is the FAA. We as pilots and users of the airport all have to follow FAA regulations. We would encourage the city to follow the same regulations. My second question is on landing fees. As we all know, landing fees are the exception rather than rule in the approximately 5,300 public use airports in the US. Here in Los Angeles County, there's only one other airport, publicly owned, publicly operated airport, Torrance, which has recently instituted landing fees, which is in litigation as being challenged. And isn't it about time that Santa Monica just did away with landing fees? We've got this huge surplus, and now we're planning to charge around about $2 per thousand pounds of max takeoff weight or landing weight, which amounts to $4 to $6 per aircraft here at Santa Monica for the average airport. That's just a nuisance fee. And I would question how much are we paying the the provider of that service to not only provide the landing fee services and the invoicing, but all the staff time that goes with it. I would challenge the fact that we're probably paying more in costs, direct and indirect, than we are reaching in revenues.
I'll note that. I mean, the revenues derived from landing fees. The cost behind the collection of landing fees is a percentage scale. There's no indirect cost that the city staff are incurring. It's all the consultant. Yes, Torrance is implementing a landing fee. There are others. I've done a study a while back, that was a lifetime ago, that I found a number of airports, especially on the East Coast, that they charge landing fees. Actually, Camarillo has a landing fee, believe it or not. They do have a landing fee. You just don't fly an aircraft heavy enough to be charged.
Sure.
So, I'm sorry.
It's a nuisance fee. It's a hardship for everybody.
Mark, can you do me a favor? I'll give you my one. Unfortunately, I don't have one too.
So for most of the general aviation fleet, which is under 3,000 pounds takeoff and landing weight, the vast majority of airports in the US don't have a landing fee. Yeah, if you're flying a jet or a turboprop or a heavy piston airplane, yeah, you could be liable for a landing fee. But think about the general aviation fleet in the US. It's at least 250,000 aircraft, and the 5,200 airports in the US, the vast majority do not charge landing fees for the vast majority of general aviation aircraft.
And we don't dispute that. So we'll note that suggestion. And I don't have an answer right now, but we'll note that.
I would encourage the city and also staff to look at the cost of the provider who's billing for these landing fees, then staff time. There is staff time to go through the reports and audit it and pay it and so on. So there has to be an overhead cost. Look at those costs and compare it with what you're getting in revenues, and I would contend that's not worth collecting. Thank you.
Actually, Mr. Hopkins, I wanted to quickly address something you had in your first question that I wanted to add on to regarding other airports and to the extent they have a surplus. And Stelios's response essentially was, you got to look at each airport as its individual airport. So as you already know, well, maybe you don't know, but it's my understanding, and I think it's still the case, that Santa Monica is the only airport in the country with a consent decree allowing it to close by a date certain. Also, so that gives you an idea of how unique this particular situation is. Also, that surplus. What
is it? My bad.
Is that your phone?
Phone.
That's my ring.
Oh, okay. That surplus number that we put up on the screen of what we expect to be in the cash register at the end of 2028, $7.2 million of that was the result of the FAA ordering us to return loans that they disallowed, and that went right into the surplus. So I can't say for a fact, but I'm pretty sure that there are not too many other airports in the country that had that exact situation. So Stelios also told you about the fair market value that we're obligated to charge non-aeronautical uses, and that goes a lot into there were non-aeronautical uses of our hangars, so we had elevated hangar rates for a while. For a while, there was a private party serving as a master tenant of the airport, and they were essentially the landlord to the stars. We had a lot of famous celebrities that were tenants here, and it was their business what they charged for those rental rates. That money became surplus. The city took over those leaseholds, and we made the decision as a proprietor that we believed that was prudent to not lower those rates. That's what the market bared, because we felt we had an obligation to continue, because that's what the market would bear, and the market is whatever willing buyer is willing to pay a willing seller. So just a couple examples of why we believe that we have the surplus that we do, and I don't know how helpful it would be to try and compare it to other airports' surpluses. So.
With all due respect, I don't think the the excuse that the city being caught with its hand in the cookie jar and cooking the books of the airport is a valid excuse.
I hear you, but that's why we had to give $7.2 million
And
back to the
that's
airport fund.
great.
Right.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, okay.
Kami, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, Kami Pahlavan from Kappa Aviation. First of all, I want to tell you, as I said, I'm not as smart as I look, but I think what I lack in intelligence, I try to make up by my willingness and my great effort to try to work and understand, despite all of the disagreement that we had over two and a half decades of me being a tenant here. And I think we've done a good job. I mean, Stelios can tell you we don't see eye to eye on a lot of stuff, but we still shake our hand very warmly and we respect each other's. I say this because I want to bring the temperature down about my question. I don't mean to get this kind of meeting we've been to many of them, has been very contentious. Obviously because of the strong opinion of two different sides. And I want to bring the temperature down and ask you a question which I cannot get the answer. So I want to understand, how does it work in city's eyes? We know how does it work in our eyes. In your view, how does it work when you have an airport fund that you're obligated to put all of the revenue in that fund and spend all of that money within the airport and its operation? How do you separate, I know how do you separate the surpluses between aviation and non-aviation, but how does it work in actual day-to-day working of separating the surpluses? What happens to the other surpluses? How are you planning to spend the other surpluses if you cannot spend it outside of the airport operation anyway, and the airport operation is only and only open for another 4 years, let's say, end of 2028, what will happen to that extra money or surplus, if you want to call it, whatever you want to call it, from the non-aviation side when the airport operation ends? What are your plans for that money? Where does it go?
Okay.
Could I explain myself right?
I think you did, and let me just say from the outset that when it comes to operating and maintaining an airport, which is what Stelios is charged with doing, as overseen by Rick over there, there's no separation of aeronautical and non-aeronautical. There is no separation when it comes to operating and maintaining the airport.
Understood.
The only separation that happens is when it comes to setting the rates and charges. And that's what Scott was attempted to explain. That's what I tried to explain. And I understand that that's perhaps maybe a conversation that requires a lot more detailed analysis or perhaps better explanations. But, there is no separation when it comes to spending money to make sure that the airport is operating how it should in a safe way that ensures the public safety. So that's a really important point that I wanted to stress. Your larger question, though, what's going to happen to the surplus? That's a public policy question. That's a city policy question, and I don't think I am I don't think I have the authority to comment on that because I don't know if any decision has been made.
Can you tell me if city is obligated, in your opinion, to spend all of the airport fund within the airport? I think that's undisputable, right?
That is undisputable between now and December 31, 2028.
Correct.
Totally,
So
not
what
disputed.
my question is, if you are operating to have a surplus by end of 2028, today is December 31st, 2028, you have millions of dollars in surplus. What will happen to that money? That's my question. If you are not spending it at the airport, if you are not doing a community hangar, if you are not sponsoring the Douglas thing, if you are not spending any or whatever else, however else the policy You have to have some plans for that money. Are you going to reimburse it to the, people that,
Right. Well,
yeah, I mean, I'm totally lost here.
Your question is the fundamental dispute that the complainants in that enforcement proceeding that we discussed earlier.
All right.
That's one of the arguments that they raised, because what normally happens in a situation where an airport closes is that the airport operator, let's just say it's a municipal government, they're required to send, if there's any surplus, to their other airport that they run. And that's not in dispute. I believe that's a fairly accurate restatement of the law. In this situation, the city doesn't own or operate another airport.
Other airport, right.
So what we have, how the city has responded in its legal papers that we've submitted with the FAA, they're all public record actually, is that we believe that if there's money, and we're projecting that there will be, it would just remain with the city for general fund purposes.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I just got my answer. Thank you.
It's not.
Just let it go.
Yeah, okay.
We're being told elsewise, so thank you for actually verbalizing it. I very appreciate your being
Sure.
a man of honor.
Good morning. My name is Greg Shem, and I'm a longtime hangar lessee here. My comment has to do with the fundamental question of fairness and equity in terms of the way this approach is taking. And maybe it's already done and it's already finalized, but you're reducing our rates, and I'm very happy about that. But the guy now rents that hangar next to me at half the rate that I've paid for decades. He gets a great deal. What about the folks who've been on leases for a long time overpaying? And when I say overpaying, it really is in relation to the quality of the hangar that we're getting. And to go back in history to figure out how we got there, is these hangars have been notoriously under-maintained, and to the point where mine in particular leaks from about every corner. It is held up hardly by any structural members, mostly by the outside. And I've got a very expensive airplane sitting in there that I worry about every time I open that gate. So what happens is people like me finally say, well, this isn't where I really want to keep my airplane. And the city finds a commercial tenant who was happy to pay twice what an aviation tenant will pay because they're running a business out of it. In fact, it's very cheap. The rates that we pay as aircraft owners is very cheap for a commercial person. So you get more commercial people. So now in my little run of hangars, I've got Santa Monica Police Department. They probably have a decent budget. We've got people running solar farms. We've got all kinds of people. Non-aviation uses would make it very difficult, to get out of there at some times. And it's caused us to have to pay as aircraft users a rate to keep up with these guys that is much higher. So why, fundamentally, in the sense of fairness, wouldn't we be entitled to a refund of what was overpaid over the years to accomplish your goal? Now, you had mentioned earlier, Councilor, that it'd be difficult to find out who those people were. But, I pose that there's leases out there. We all know who the tenants were. I assume there are still records, and it might be a fairer way to do it. And I guess the last thing I want to add on in terms of the maintenance, I think there was a $1.4 million allocated for aircraft infrastructure.
$4 million.
$4 million.
$4 million.
Well, I want to talk to you about that because, there's a couple of hangars that could really use some of that. And most important.
No, the $4 million is just the runway, taxiway, and lighting for those.
Was there not an amount, though,
There's
for?
1.4.
1.4.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I mentioned.
That's the budget going forward to 31. If there are additional ones that we can invest, or that we need to do refurbishments, we could do it. It's not that we're not going to do it. That's our budget.
So is there capital available to upgrade some of these really bad hangars? And in
Depending
addition
which
to that,
ones they are. If you show, I'll be happy to talk to you specifically of what you're talking about.
okay, well, number 12 is where I'm at, but
Number 12.
I think a lot of them are pretty similar. The other thing is the the rampways have not been maintained very well over the years. I don't think it's been swept or vacuumed in the 10 years I've been in front of that particular hangar. And we're getting to the point where so much of that prop wash is causing damage to the aircraft, to the propellers, blowing it out on cars across the fence. So 2 levels to my comment. 1, fairness, why shouldn't it go back to the people who put it in? And 2, why are we paying for these rates and not getting the services that I think are required under the leases? I mean, I think that should happen right away, even if it's remaining 4 or 5 years. It's just been put off for too long.
Okay, I'll try to address both. In relating to the maintenance, right? We have supers running all the time. If you have not been addressed with where you are specifically, let us know. We'll be happy to bring the sweeper over. We have 3 sweepers on the field.
I've done that. I've got a number of emails I put in and nothing's happened.
Then let me go and talk to my property management team.
I'll
to
send you
find
the
out
emails.
exactly. That's fine with me.
Sure.
And I'll look into it. When it comes to
we ingest any of those particulates, in a turbine engine, and it can be a $250,000 issue.
No, I understood. I understood 100%. Relating to the refunds, I think we've answered it up to now. It's noted. There are others that brought it forth. We just don't have a response right now. The way we approached it is we used the surplus, the aeronautical surplus, and we brought it to 0 at December 31st, 2028. That pot of money, and we can dispute or not, but that pot of money is what the city is looking for, right? It's the $13 million pot. If we take for refunds, if that's the decision we make, if we take it into consideration, then it takes away from the 13 million. It's all math, right? But as of now, responding to you, we noted it, and we move forward and see.
And I thank you. And I understand it's an easier way to approach it, the way you're doing it. And probably another metric that you haven't included in that is, as we get closer to the closing date, fewer and fewer airplanes are going to be here. So you're going to have a reduction in of those people who are having reduction in rent. But anyway, I just wanted to make that comment. I think there's a real question of fairness here, and I think those people can be located. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And if you can send me the emails, I'll be happy to pass them.
Hi, my name is Derek Spears. I was an 18-year resident of Santa Monica until I had to move to Mar Vista for various reasons, but I am walking airport adjacent still, and I've been a 20-plus year tenant at a tie down. I wish I was a hangar leasee. I've been tried to be on it. I've been on a list that magically disappeared at one point and was never informed. But that's the second question. My first question is, and I apologize if this has been answered because I did have to walk in late. If we are running a surplus, what is the impetus for still having a landing fee? What purpose did that serve instead of just abolishing it? And I apologize again if that question was answered because I did have to join the meeting late.
Okay, before you get to your second question, I believe the answer to the first question is it's purely a city policy issue. If we get direction from management and from council to abolish a landing fee, that's what staff will get cracking on working on. So.
Okay, then I would posit the way the landing fee was sold to the airport, and I have been a tenant at the airport since before the fee. In fact, when the fee was just for visiting aircraft and then got changed, it was sold to the population here as a need to maintain the airport. That obviously doesn't exist with the surplus. So if that doesn't exist, I would think that needs to come before the city council to abolish it, because the fee serves no purpose other than being punitive.
Our proposal today is looking at the entire rates and charges, not just landing fee.
Okay.
So I would. The 53% reduction across the board was a policy decision to reduce all the rates across the board by 53%, including hangar rates.
And that is appreciated. I want to come out and say, be forthright, as a tenant, I appreciate those reductions, but the landing fees, again, feel nothing more than punitive at this point if they don't serve a revenue purpose.
So let's assume that we go that route. Let's say we've noted you're not the only one. Many people have mentioned the landing fee. If we take that pot of money out and say is 0, so we're not going to make a reduction of 53%, it's going to be 100%, then that piece needs to go into other.
Sure,
rates,
I think
which you're not going to even look at, because you're not going to even see any difference.
Sure, and if I may, to carry that thought out, I don't think anybody here would be opposed to, I I pay $120 a month for a tie-down fee. I have no issue with that as a tie-down fee. If you were to keep the tie-down fees where they were and abolish the landing fees, I would be a much happier person.
Administrative portion of it is such a hassle with sending payment to them and sending billing and this
Yeah.
and that. Just
Good point.
FYI.
Yeah.
No, that's
I think they're.
It's not so much the money as it is the effort for that.
Yeah, and-
It's for the tenants.
Yeah, and it seems, again, contrasting with other aircraft and other airports, from a light plane owner, being very unique in this situation, again, I want to keep using the word punitive, it feels like an effort to punish or keep people away, and it is a very different framing than saying, I'm going to pay this much for a tie-down. And I think there are better ways to raise revenue that are cooperative.
No.
Okay. Second point of the question, which ties into the I wish I had a hangar. We've mentioned many, many times there are many non-airport use hangars out there. And at one point in time, it seemed to be city policy. They were trying to actively encourage removing those. That seemed to stop about the same time the hangar waiting list went away magically. I would love to have a hangar. I can't pay $2,000 a month for a hangar. In fact, it's cheaper for me to repaint my aircraft every year than to do that. But is there a way in which we can look at trying to service our community, let people who have aviation uses for hangars pay a market hangar rate, not a market real estate rate? This is an aircraft. This is an airport. So is that part of the dialogue? Is that part of the discussion?
Okay. So let me speak about the light aircraft covers that you're referring to about the waiting list.
Yeah.
When I came to this airport in 2006, there was an active waiting list. People were waiting for.
Yeah, I'd been on it
at
for
that
10
time
years.
was 12 years, and
Yeah.
nobody. So we did several. We reached to everybody on the list several times based on the information we had on hand. If you didn't reach to you, we apologize.
No,
so
I was never contacted.
Putting that aside for a second, this proposal is reducing the market rate for hangar rentals by 53%, meaning the 2,000 you just mentioned is less than 1,000.
I would love to talk to somebody about that. If I can get Claudia to call me back, sign me up tomorrow.
I'll be happy to get
Yeah.
Claudia to let you know.
But is there availability issue because we have a lot of non-aviation uses? I mean, I personally know people storing cars in hangars.
The hangar's priority is aviation, is not non-aviation. And every lease agreement that we have on the airfield that are used for non-aeronautical purposes has a provision within that aviation takes precedent, and if we have demand, that tenant goes out and an aviation use comes.
For instance, and this is hypothetical because I don't know your situation, if there are no available hangars and I request a hangar and there's a non-aviation use hangar, you are saying you will eject that person?
Yes.
Okay.
That's the stand of the city. It's always been the stand of the city.
In what time frame? What time frame?
Yeah,
A month, a year, 10 years?
I would. Yeah.
That's the question.
Yeah.
I'm not. Get out
I
there.
appreciate that because I definitely would like to get a hangar. And if we can find out what the current rates are for that and if we're competitive with other city airports,
I'll be happy to discuss.
I appreciate that. Thank you for your
Although
time.
they don't believe me, but it's fine.
I do appreciate your time.
Hi there, my name's Ed Story. I am an interested party, I guess that's the best way to put it. I'm also an airport advocate. Stelios knows me. Ivan knows me. Unfortunately, I don't know the gentleman in the middle. And what is his name again?
Scott Lewis.
Scott Lewis. And Scott, you're retained by the city, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And does the cost of your retention come out of the airport fund or come out of the city revenues, from taxes?
It comes out of the airport fund.
Okay, and so you've got somebody that's being paid for out of the airport fund that's arguing against the people that are for the airport. Is that accurate?
No, it's not.
How would you restate it?
We retain somebody to help us navigate the recent letter by the FAA to reset our rates and charges.
Yes, good question. Aeronautical or non-aeronautical?
I believe it's non-aeronautical what we charge his rates to.
Okay, so Scott's fees then are divided into aeronautical and non-aeronautical?
Right, and they would be 100%. Well, actually, that's okay. So let me clarify. Mr. Lewis was retained, Scott was retained sometime in 2013 or 2012 or whatever, and he is, over the years, helped us defend actions brought by airport users, by the industry, several Part 16s. So him and his firm have represented the city.
Which is the firm again?
Anderson and Krieger.
Anderson and Krieger.
Okay.
I knew that, Scott.
And does Anderson and Krieger have a history of doing this kind of work
Yes,
at other
they do.
airports?
Yes, they do. They are among the best in the country, and that's why we hired them. So my point is that hiring attorneys to defend an airport in litigation or an administrative
You call
proceeding-
this, Ivan, defending an airport?
Well, if the city is the respondent or if the city is the defendant, then yes, I would call
Okay,
it.
I would call it defending the city, not the airport.
Fair enough, defending the city.
Okay,
Um,
so this firm has a history of working against airports.
Well, no, I would say that the...
Ivan, can you let him tell us a little bit about his story about the firm so
Well,
we can
what
start
my,
from
my,
there?
my larger point is the money that the city pays to retain Mr. Lewis and his firm is a lawful and valid use of airport funds. That's all I wanted to say. It's completely within the federal law.
Can you give me an idea of the costs that have been incurred by retaining his firm for the last, say, 5 years?
You know, I don't have that information off the top of my head, but Ed, I promise I can get that to you. If you want to send me an email, and I'll work on
I'll be
getting
happy
you that
to send you an
information.
email.
Yes, and I'll treat it as a record, a public records request.
Yeah, we're on the record here, so
Okay.
consider you've been asked. Okay?
Can I,
Okay.
I think it's important, Ivan, there was an assumption made right now, a stipulation made that their firm works against airports. And I want Scott to respond to that because I want to know, I want to put the history on record of their firm instead of making stipulations. And that's for
Okay.
me. Go ahead, Scott.
I certainly wouldn't characterize it that way. My own experience, I've represented municipal governments that own, municipal and state governments and public authorities that own over 100 airports. I specialize in airport regulation.
Okay, so in that context then, who in city government gives you the marching orders as to what you're supposed to do in cases like this, for instance?
That would be the city attorney.
That would be yourself?
No, that would be my boss, Doug Sloan.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, and so when that person gives Mr. Lewis a marching orders, are those marching orders to find out the best way that we can kill this airport? Or is those marching orders to figure out a way to get out of what the FAA has asked you to do?
It's a simple answer.
None of these things are simple, Stelios.
Well, let me ask, so can you put all your questions, for instance, we feel like we're going one by one of the questions. Is that a big picture or you want us to
because there's
answer-
more than one question.
Okay.
I mean, you folks have
Well,
opened
so
up the
when
whole
it
of
comes to
questions.
when it comes to this of what we're proposing today, the proposed rates and charges of this meeting today, they were retained to abide by the consent decree. That's what his guidance, helping us guide us to do. This is what his guidance is.
Well, I guess the reason that I asked this question, Stelios, should be pretty obvious. Because it appears to me, and listen, correct me if I'm wrong, but it appears to me that the marching orders given to Mr. Lewis is find the best possible way that we can get out of our obligations that the FAA has given us.
That is false.
It's false.
And I don't
Why?
believe that Scott will support anybody that tells him to violate federal law to get us to the other side. And I'll let him answer that.
Okay.
But it is
No,
false.
my charge is very simple. Advise the city on the requirements of federal aviation law as they apply to this particular airport. And that's exactly what I've done.
Okay, but underneath that advise the airport is this feeling, at least it appears to me, of come up with the best possible way that we can get rid of the airport.
No, Ed, as a preliminary matter, the advice that Scott gives us specifically and our communications to him are privileged, but what I can be fairly confident in saying is we have never told Scott, go close the airport or go find a way to, destroy the airport. That's not what the city's doing. That's
the city has the right.
The city
has
is not
the right to close it anyway.
The city is not. 2029. I guess let me clarify right now. Okay, so that's not the marching orders as you stated. That's not the instruction to my office or. Right now, as Stelios mentioned, what we're trying to do is we're trying to satisfy even this event here is all done in satisfaction of the requirement that the airport operator, prior to implementing new rates and charges, consult with users, and that's what we're trying to do. There's nothing nefarious that we're doing. That we're not telling our attorneys to do anything nefarious here. And
okay.
Well, that's a different conversation. You're talking policy level conversations here.
Record, please. So can I put it for the record? So the question is, say that one more time so I can say it in the mic.
Why is there no possibility in this financial agreement that includes the airport being open beyond December 31st, 2020?
Just restate the question and answer.
Okay, I'll restate it. Why is there nothing in this calculation that relates to the possibility, I'm not saying the probability, but the possibility that the airport will continue beyond the end of 2028? Is that
That's
accurate?
not what the rates and charges do. What the rates and charges do, knowing there is a probability that the airport will close beyond December 31st, 2028, is prudent enough for staff sitting here and our outside counsel and city management to take that into consideration and provide all the aeronautical surplus paid back to the users.
Well,
let me answer that. If you go beyond, let's say we don't put December 31st, 2028, then the rates, the 53% reduction that we're proposing, will be much, much lower.
So stipulated, fine. We're okay with that, Stelios. You hear that from us. We are okay. You're saying
Okay.
it's a probability, but it's a possibility. It is not a probability. City council has not made that decision.
Well, okay, let's back up. You brought up city council, okay? So in 2017, the council adopted a particular resolution in directing staff to take all measures, actions, or whatever to prepare for closure of the airport by a date certain. That council resolution hasn't changed. It hasn't been rescinded. It hasn't. That's correct. But until there's another resolution, either repealing that one, that's the direction that our council has given our manager, that the manager and the city attorney have given us. Now that's where the intersection of we're here trying to explain new rates and charges and why we only projected out to that year is because it remains an open question. Part of the process that's starting Sunday is to engage with community users as to what they want to see as far as the future of this facility. But for our purposes, we found it prudent, as we know for a fact, for a certainty that there's going to be an airport here in 2027. That's a fact. The 2028, we're obligated under the consent decree. So unless there's a change to that agreement, there's going to be an airport here. Now, 2029 is an open question. So that's why, to answer your question, why the numbers projected to that date. Because of the council resolution and because what we know for a fact, for certain, are the date of the years that there's going to be an airport here.
Let me reclaim the podium for just a second, if I may. I think the point has been made. The question that I would like to pose is there a way in which the pilot community here can interact with the folks that are setting Mr. Lewis's marching orders in such a fashion so that we don't end up in situations like this, where we're essentially contentious because you folks have come up with an internally created approach to this, when you've got a lot of interested parties here who are very interested in this and very capable of filing more lawsuits and creating more costs for the city. So why not have a means by which there can be a cooperative determination of this before it gets to this kind of a point? Is that not a reasonable request?
It's very reasonable. It sounds like you are asking the best way to petition the decision makers.
Yeah, and as has been pointed out earlier, the Airport Commission is a zero. It is a zero because there's no aviators on it. And why, if you've got a disabled commission and the disabled commission has disabled people on it, now you've got an airport commission and it has no airport advocates on it.
So relating to the airport commission, I know you mentioned it repeatedly, but those commissioners were selected by the city council of the city.
I understand that.
You might disagree with that, like there is disagreements in politics all the time.
Yeah.
Or who is assigned to those?
Even the manager can't select
We
commissioners.
can't select them.
No.
Okay, I understand that the people sitting at your table can't do that.
Right.
What I'm suggesting is that there be some effort by the city too, not just us, but by the city to try to come up with a cooperative way to operate these kinds of questions. So I leave that with you. I can't answer the question right at the moment, but I do look forward to some sort of response. Last question I have is, one of the numbers that I have not heard today is, and correct me Stelios or Eve on what the number was, but I believe it was 8 or 9 years ago, 10 years ago, that the city employed HR&A consulting firm to determine what is the value however that was defined, in dollars of the airport's presence. And if I recall correctly, the number was in excess of $250 million a year. Is that roughly correct?
That's roughly correct.
Okay.
Now that number represents total economic activity output.
Total economic activity. So in the context of all these deliberations that presumably, as we're finding out today, have occurred without any of our involvement, has that 250 or 270, whatever the number was, $1 million per year in total economic value to Santa Monica, the city, not the airport, the city, has that been taken into consideration?
I'm pretty sure it was.
By whom?
I would like to hope that it was.
Okay, by whom?
The policymakers of the city of Santa Monica.
Who is
That would be
the
the
city?
The city council members.
City council.
That's correct.
Okay. Well, I hope that in the future that number, I hope some people will listen to these recordings and that number will be taken into consideration. And I hope that we can come up with some cooperative way to deal with these questions in the future. So there you are.
Thank you.
Hold on, Kevin. The person was patiently sitting there waiting to speak.
I didn't want to. If it's really quick, you can do it. Mine's going to be really long. So there you go. Hey, Mark. Ivan, I have a question. As far as this, the airport commission goes, is there anybody other than the city council that can recommend, not put in place, but recommend people for as part of the airport commission?
You're right here. No, you're right here. You can all ask.
Celios can make a recommendation. I believe Rick could make a recommendation. I believe the city
No,
manager.
somebody, that's within the city, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Can make a recommendation.
Are they
I believe
willing
that
to do
there's
that as you know, to keep a balance at least between aviators and non-aviators?
I can't speak for those people. I do know there's an application process to be a commissioner. I'm not familiar with what's on the application, unfortunately. So I think that there would be a certain amount of a potential commissioner reaching out to the city staff member that they want the recommendation from.
Ivan, we have 10 minutes to 1 o'clock,
Okay.
so I need to be courteous to other people's time.
Thank you.
Hi guys, I'm a little ill at the moment, so pardon
Have
that.
the name first, sir?
Yeah, it's Duncan Thomas. I've been here about 5 or 6 years. I've been a pilot since I was 4. I grew up on an airport back in Australia. My parents were pilots. I used to work at McKinsey in Bain, and so I've got a few comments with regards to the modelling. But first, I think the question with regards to transparency is really important. And the reason for that, recently I went over to Whiteman for their commissioners' meeting. We have one coming up over at El Monte in a couple of weeks' time. I encourage everybody else to attend those meetings. What I was unaware of at the meeting was that the FAA requires 3 independent reports. And the issue that the commissioners over there are grappling with was that they got an outside, with all due respect to Scott, I don't know Scott at all, but they got an outside the state consultant. They paid that consultant for 2 months to be licensed in-state to do their report. This is all public records, so you can look at the records. And they came up with a report with regards to the fairness of fees that you're talking about. So this issue is at the county level, LA County. It's being discussed actively right now. The issue I see as this is the transparency issue, which the other gentleman brought up, I think is a very good one. And, Scott, to your benefit, it would help you and your company, to grapple with these things and present it in a way which allows everybody to feel that this is a fair and equitable kind of process. But I would go to the meetings coming up because it will be discussed. With that, the issue about, and I've got 3 points. One is about the modelling. 2 is about vertiport. I brought up this issue about vertiport at the Santa Monica Council meeting where some of you guys were last year. There was one person on that council who actually said, hey, that's a pretty good idea. And this gets to the amount of funds which are available at the end, and therefore the modelling. So the vertiport is, as you see here, we are at the junction, that end of the runway, of probably 4 or 5 million people. There are lots of communities at that end, right, which require, whether it's your VIP, it's search and rescue, etc. And if you go out 5 miles or 10 miles, you get to the beach, you get all the way down to Century City, you get past Mar Vista. It's the only place that's here. The airport goes away. What happens to Class D airspace down at the beach? Class D airspace, which prevents the high-rises being built down there, goes through the roof. Now, at that council meeting last year, they said, well, it's going to cost us $100 million, to your point about economic impact. And as you know, it costs $100 million as we go out, and they had a consultant, if you'll remember, and the consultant was there. They're spending millions of dollars on consulting fees and going to these great spaces around the world. And I quote, you can look at the minutes where they said, I kid you not, we are having 5-year-olds envision what this is going to look like in 50 to 100 years. 5-year-olds. I mean, pretty ridiculous, really, isn't it? Can you remember what you were doing when you were 5? But the point is that if it's going to cost you $100 million to redevelop the site, and they haven't even thought about, my ex works for EVgo, one of my best friends works for Laz Parking. He's one of the owners. We are already, we've got contracts with United Technologies, United Therapeutics, where we transport with drones and autonomous vehicles already, hearts, lungs, and people around the city from parking spots. But a vertiport hasn't even been considered in the plan here. You know, we've got, how much, 3,500 feet for an airport remaining? But to even have 1,000 feet left behind for the 50 to 100 years, when you're trying to envision the future, you've got to have options. And when you get rid of Class D and you have, you know, you come into Santa Monica, when you're leaving, and I came here in 93, I would go downtown to work and it was jammed, right? I go to El Monte every day now and it's jammed coming in, jammed. And where are all these people going? To the water gardens and so on. Imagine the increase in development over the next 50 years in this area without having access, aviation access. I'm not talking about planes, I'm talking about anything electric, drones. You know, we have Dave Ronenberg over there building stuff down in Paraguay, autonomous vehicles for other people. We should be having a spot here, including that into our thinking. This gets to the first point I really had, which was the modeling. The modeling, I had a quick read of it last night. To me, it doesn't include any what-ifs. There are no A, B, or C. It's a straight line, and tell me if I'm wrong, it's a straight line between here and the end of 2028, correct?
Correct.
Right. So what happens in the what-ifs? Scott, can you really predict what's going to be happening in 2 years' time? Can you predict the probabilities around any of these? Have you run simulations on any of those probabilities with regards to aircraft traffic and so on? Have you?
No reasonable assumptions were made.
Assumptions, as you know, garbage in, garbage out. The model can be very good. The model can be good. We all know that. But it all depends on those assumptions, doesn't it?
Well, and they're disclosed. I mean, just to be
Right.
clear, the projections of future revenues, future
And they
costs
look
are
good.
disclosed.
I'm not arguing that.
Right.
The point I'm arguing, and I'm really suggesting is, if you're really going to do a good job, I believe, and I've done this for years, I ran 2 public companies, and I've been a CFO, this is what I do. There's no, assumptions in there which say this is A, B, and C. And by the way, I think it should be 70%, not 53%. I was here late, so I have no idea what anybody else is thinking, but I ran the math, and I think it's more like 70%. And you should accelerate it in the first few years so that you have, in the last 2 years or the last year, the ability to say, well, it didn't really work out the way we thought it did. I mean, I bet, Stelios, when you go back to 2006 or 16 when you first came?
6.
6. So I can guarantee, sitting here right today, we never thought we'd be here, did we? I mean, the world has changed so much. We've had, wars and fights and, presidents and all kinds of crap. We can never guarantee what the future looks like. But this model basically stamps 4 years exactly how it should be. And we know that's not going to work. We know that doesn't happen. But there's nothing built in to say, let's accelerate the give back over, say, the next 3 years, flatline it for the last year, and then we have, maybe excess money we can put into a vertiport. So I would, if there was a point to be made here, I would like there to be put into the minutes, suggestion again, vertiport, keep the place open for optionality into the future. So,
can I speak to the vertiport?
Yeah.
So the event that is happening this weekend at Clover, what time is it? I'm trying to remember. 11 to 3. That's the place to go and make these suggestions.
11
This
to
is
3
envisioning the future.
Sunday? What Sunday?
Sorry, what? Sunday.
Okay. Sunday, 11 to 3.
Is the city starting the process of planning what will be here?
Right.
Right. So
Great suggestion.
if you
Yep.
want vertiports, I suggest that
I'll be there.
you go and.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you for that.
That group could really use your
Thank you.
perspective, I believe. So
The last point. then I know we're running out of time. Last
We
point.
are out of time, but because you were sitting there patiently, I'll allow it a little more minutes.
Thank you, everybody else. It gets to, I didn't see in the document the ability, and we have this problem, as you know, if you've gone down to El Monte, those who go down there, and there's been a few of us who now go down there because the rates at Bill's SNO were so high. I helped him get the lease down there at El Monte because it was uneconomic staying here. So I know the math, right? I got the lease, me personally. So I went to all LA County airports, all 5. I met with the admin. I'm involved with both those 2 airports in terms of this, the fairness of use. Now, the question is, if someone mentioned it, like, Jerry Seinfeld has, I think someone told me yesterday, there's a guy in the airport, and he has cars worth $100 million, right? $100 million. I bought my plane for $28,000. $100 million. And I have been asking for years to get a hangar. I have been asking for years, and my little dinky plane, which you see flying around the place, is the red and white one, by the way, guys. I can't get a hangar. The issue that we're dealing with at those other 2 airports is that the non-airport fees, as you know, were jacked up by the American airport.
Yes, I know.
Right, you know all about that, right? And so they got kicked out for doing that.
Yes.
And so the administration there is fantastic. They're really keen on, every other weekend we have people come into the airport, like we had one last weekend. It's fantastic. But if I'm looking for a hangar, what's to say that internally, and this gets to the point of kicking someone out, that I actually get a fair shake at getting a hangar at a reasonable rate when I know it's in policy and I know it's written down, but people are people, right? That the person who's sitting behind the desk sees that Jerry Seinfeld's going to have his frickin' cars here. Duncan Thomas has just got a podunk little plane. Who are we going to give the hangar to? And there's nothing in the policy which says that there's any. I have any whatever the right word is.
So can I respond? So you do, implying that my staff or the direction we provide to staff is different of what we're speaking today is false.
Okay, but I have asked, to the point, to the record, I have asked on multiple occasions
Can you
over the
forward me
years.
those and I'll address it with my staff because the rates are going to be reduced by 53% if these proposed rates are adopted by council.
Okay, so
we don't know if they're going to be adopted or not,
Right.
but let's assume they do.
I'm going
July
to
1,
make for
they're gonna be-
record, I am rejecting the letter. I personally am going on record
letter?
saying it should be higher,
I understand.
and I'm going on record saying there needs to be consideration to, like a vertiport, and thank you for Sunday, and I'm going on record to say that there needs to be provisions within the policy which allows pilots who have planes to actually get the hangars and not be strung out by people who have got non-hangars, as we've seen. How many people, raise your hand, have had that record where they wanted to get a hangar and couldn't? There's quite a few, right? So I'm not just blowing
So
smoke
you
up your
couldn't
ass.
because we didn't offer you a hangar, or you couldn't because you wouldn't want to pay the rates?
No, and I
There's
couldn't
a
get
big-
it. I couldn't get the hangar, and I asked, and they say, "Hey,
Who did you
Duncan,
talk
thank you
to?
very much. I will look into that," over and over again, and I just forgot
I'll
about
be
it.
happy to talk to you after this meeting and tell me who you spoke specifically because I want to find that out.
Pedro and Aeroplex a week ago.
You told them that they told you that they don't have hangars?
Correct. No, at the end of the, no. At the north side, Pedro says 0, maybe 1 T hangar coming up at the end of the month, maybe and a corporate box, a $10,000 a month, box. North side of the field, that has, I've been talking to them since 2018 about hangar issues. It is the same thing. So what Duncan is saying
Note.
is 100% correct. I looked at 2 hangars yesterday that Claudia told me about because I can be annoying, shocking, but I can be annoying trying to say what's up with the hangars. Those hangars should be condemned. They're what Greg was saying, it's the hangar right in front of his, hangar 14. It is silly putty to keep the flood stuff out. It is complete black mold.
hangars are actually a pretty big issue for a lot of us because the air is salty and wet. And I'll give you just one little example. So a couple of years ago, most of these people know that I've got the plane with the big tires on it, and I put new bearings on it, and it was down along the strip. And the side that was facing the sea, I'd replaced the bearings 2 years later. They locked up on me. They were so corroded. So hangars are a big deal for us, and we haven't been able to make headway. Thank you for looking into it. Appreciate it. And thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. We reached the end of the actual, went a little bit over. Thank you for coming here and participating. I really appreciate the candid responses that came to us and the passionate responses to them. Some of the things that you mentioned over here, we've noted them. We are going again. I want to remind you, tomorrow we're at Airport Commission. Budget session is the 28th of this month at City Council chambers. And then adoption is June 25th. If the council adopts these rates, they go into effect July 1. Thank you again.